Greetings and welcome to the Serial Talker podcast. I am Peter Von Gomm, and today we're getting into part 3 of this deep and fascinating story about the Silk Road, the dark web that Ross Ulbricht started back in 2011. The feds are hot on his case, and an undercover agent has made contact with him and offered him the deal of a century to buy Silk Road. This, of course, is their tactic to lure the mastermind into their net, apprehend Dread Pirate Roberts, and put an end to Silk Road. Let's get into it. Back in Baltimore, Force was fluffing pillows. This was his habit in the evening, a way to clear his mind before getting on Silk Road as Knob. For the first couple of weeks, Knob pushed his big Silk Road investment scheme, but DPR declined, saying essentially, this operation is bigger than you think. And it was, because Silk Road worked extremely well. DPR's robust stewardship was paying off. To protect against scammers, he created a Silk Road escrow, where all transactions would be held until settled. DPR wanted to create what he called a center of trust, and it was this centralized payment structure that enabled Silk Road to really take off. So when Knob offered to buy the operation, DPR countered with quite a price, $1 billion. Knob scoffed, but in fact, DPR's number might have been low. The scale of Silk Road commissions over the next year would in fact qualify DPR as one of the biggest entrepreneurs of the second internet boom. Besides, he told Knob, this is more than a business to me. It's a revolution and is becoming my life's work. In essence, Dread Pirate Roberts faced a classic founder's dilemma. It would not be easy to pass the baton without hurting the enterprise, he messaged Knob. And right now that is more important to me than the money. Force kept communication with DPR alive by talking about creating a parallel site for cartels, a pro version called Masters of Silk Road. He spent many nights in his guest room, Pablo purring by his side, forging a camaraderie with DPR through the intimacy of late-night tour chat. At times, they sounded like college kids getting to know each other in the freshman dorm. The food pyramid is bullshit, DPR said, encouraging Knob to go paleo. Knob advised DPR against seeing the latest Batman, invited him to LA for tacos, and talked about how much Latinos liked the Smiths. DPR had never heard of the Smiths, but otherwise, Force's mysterious new pen pal was appropriately cagey. He didn't want to meet up for tacos. For some reason, Force always imagined DPR as a skinny white kid, probably on the West Coast, based on his active hours. Force liked him, this kid he had in mind as DPR. He enjoyed getting deep into the culture of Silk Road. It reminded him of his undercover days. He thought about DPR living a double life and the allure and danger of taking on a new identity. Force had seen it firsthand in his years in undercover. He came to love being that criminal operator big shot. But a new self comes with a price. The more Force pretended and partied, the easier it was to inhabit the part. At home, he was the clean-cut, church-going dad. But when he was at a nightclub hunting for drug deals, liquor flowing, surrounded by chicks, it was hard to believe just how comfortable he felt. Eventually, Force stopped drinking and recommitted himself to church. He'd been a hot undercover agent, but he left behind the double life that nearly destroyed him. That's how he wound up in the Baltimore office, living in a suburban 2-story, with a big solid oak tree in the backyard. But now here he was, within sight of that oak, his family in the next room, venturing again into the drug world as someone else. Force recognized it was all a dangerous game. He knew how you could change. He could see it in DPR already. The thing about taking on a new identity is that it is fundamentally a lie. To the world at first, and then to yourself. The world is in flux, Ross tells the camera. He sits across from his friend Renee Pennell, recording for StoryCorps, a non-profit that invites anyone to share their life experiences. Ross and Renee thought the world should know more about them, so they entered the StoryCorps booth, closed the door, and spent half an hour with each other and the camera. In this recording, Ross is contemplative. He lives in San Francisco now. It has been a revelation. He is awed by the beauty and the entrepreneurial energy. He came at the invitation of Renee, whom he'd known since 7th grade. Renee had been an aspiring filmmaker who instead wound up in technology in San Francisco, and one day he phoned Ross, intoning the great American clarion call of opportunity out west. 2 weeks later, Ross showed up on his friend's doorstep. In the video, they get nostalgic about childhood. There was the time the two of them tried to steal extra tater tots in the lunchroom at West Ridge Middle School. The way Ross would eat his peanut butter chocolate wafers, precisely, by nibbling down the layers. How uncool it was when Ross had a sleepover and some bad kids stole a year's worth of change he'd saved. Of course, they talk about love, as young men do. Ross reminisces about Ashley at first and her great bod. The first time they'd hung out, they did psychedelics, something called AMT. They got it from his neighbor Brandon, a super brilliant physics student who was into all these research chemicals. Ross was still a teenager then, lying on the floor, expanding his mind next to a beautiful girl for 8 hours. Life is a fluctuating value, Renee says, like currency. Renee thinks his friend is a traitor. Renee talks about how Austin is the meh of startups, whereas San Francisco is the mecca. It's late 2012, a time of fever dreams in the Bay Area, full of people wanting to change the world and make a lot of money in the process. Renee may not know it, but he is sitting next to someone doing just that. Ross and Renee wonder, what will happen in 200 years? I want to have a substantial positive impact on the future of humanity by the time I die, Ross says. Renee asks Ross if he thinks he'll live forever. Ross looks up, breaks into a tiny smile. Yes, he says, I think I might. As Silk Road became a true global market, DPR reveled in his role as leader and libertarian evangelist. He created a book club where users could polish their dogma from the sacred texts of von Mises himself. He talked more about a near future when our current governments would seem like ancient history, along with the pharaohs and their armies of slaves. He extolled the Silk Road faithful for being on the front lines of revolution. Thank you, DPR said, for your trust, faith, camaraderie, and love. He offered them hugs, not drugs, then amended it. Wait, hugs and drugs. The community responded in kind, likening DPR to Che Guevara, calling him a job creator and declaring that his name would live on among the greatest men and women in history. Silk Road had become a brand cult with tens of thousands of fanatical users, and DPR was their very own Steve Jobs. Force sensed DPR's swelling confidence. He'd been talking to him for a year, taking in DPR's personality and passion. Force could appreciate the appeal. It must be intoxicating, bringing an idea to life, projecting your will into the world through encrypted code and transactions. Sometimes DPR said that he sensed the scale of this achievement and would hear the theme of Tron playing in his head. This was the new spirit of DPR, a self-created beacon in the darkness, spreading the good word through libertarian jubilee, holding aloft his lantern of truth. It was a lonely outpost, however. DPR said so to Knob. He called himself a person who hides behind computers. At times, DPR wished they could meet. Instead, they shared a mix of truth and lies in their chats. Knob, you doing good? Dread, yes sir, today is a good day. Knob, so that black cloud that was over your head is gone? Dread, the new look rolled out with minimal issues, woke up next to a beautiful woman, and I'm listening to one of my favorite bands, and eating fresh strawberries. They talked shop, site fixes, the odd holiday slump in drug sales, the human resources problems of a clandestine telecommuting workplace. This was a big problem. To grow, DPR said, he had to build a strong workforce. A leader needs support so he can focus on the future. I just want to let you know that your work hasn't gone unnoticed, DPR wrote to Chronic Pain, aka Curtis Green, the Mormon grandpa in Spanish Fork, Utah. I'd like to offer you a position. Green had been on Silk Road for some time, and he'd chosen that screen name because of his own chronic pain caused by a back injury he sustained while working as an EMT. On disability, Green had become an amateur pharmacologist, learning the ins and outs of opiates. Green had always been the hobbyist type, ever since his high school obsession with ham radios, which he used to talk to strangers all over the world, including astronauts on the International Space Station. Silk Road fulfilled his yearning for community and technical intricacy, combining computers with his interest in safe drug use. With DPR's approval, Green started Silk Road's Health and Wellness Forum, where he advised people on how to snort ephedrine, cautioned against fentanyl for the uninitiated, and explained to someone that it's not a good idea to inject peanut butter or shoot heroin into your eyeball. When Green's diligent forum moderating turned into a job offer from DPR, he was thrilled. DPR sent a job description, which included customer service and resetting passwords. Green, taking on a new admin handle, Flush, worked 80 hours a week, mediating drug sale disputes from his lazy boy, Fox News, running in the background. DPR was a complicated boss. He could be a tough taskmaster, haranguing Green for being even 1 minute late to an appointed time on TorChat. Green was chagrined when he got no Christmas greeting. But other times DPR was full of generosity, staking Green in a poker tournament and being unfazed when Green lost it all. Like a digital-era Don, he could be affectionate and magnanimous in public, but decidedly less humane behind the scenes. He gave audience to loyal users seeking favors. One guy got help buying a wedding ring, but was decidedly unsympathetic to the real consequences of his business. Green forwarded one troubling customer service complaint from a woman whose brother overdosed on heroin from Silk Road, and noted that under the current system, children could use the site. Perhaps that was a hair too much freedom, Green said. DPR erupted. That's my whole idea. Any constraints would destroy the fundamental concept, he said, and refused any assistance for the grieving sister. And yet Green stayed on, despite the insensitivity and ethical contradictions, becoming one of Silk Road's most trusted employees. On Silk Road, however, trust only went so far. DPR demanded a scan of Green's driver's license. It was a loyalty test. Green obliged, even though it exposed him while allowing DPR to remain in the shadows. Like Force, Green felt like he'd established quite a bond with DPR, partners in a secret world. But not all secrets are partnerships. No matter how close Green or Force or anyone else got to DPR, no one had any idea who he was. Tarbell had 3 computers on his desk, as did Kiernan and Yum. The Cyber Squad crew looked for any flicker of information that would crack open the dark web. But their investigation was moving slowly. They explored the site, read the forums, and crawled Reddit looking for Silk Road community members, talking to each other or to DPR about cryptographic weaknesses they'd discovered. But a month went by with no traction. The crew ate lunch together every day at 11:30 on the nose, like the habit-happy cops they were. Most of the time, they picked up sandwiches downstairs at the deli, where the guy behind the counter knew them all by their order. Kiernan would be happy with chicken cordon bleu forever, and Tarbell was such a fan of the chicken parmesan that when he'd occasionally get a salad, the deli guy would say, what's the matter, Mr. CIA? No chicken parm today?" Tarbell called Yum his work wife. They were a good team, he thought, the thinker and the talker. Tarbell was the talker. He had by now emerged as the dominant personality in the pit. The dues-paying rookie of the previous year had given way to a raucous, confident alpha type who bristled when he heard rumblings from Washington about ownership of the Silk Road investigation. The case had become an enormous bureaucratic battle as every agent tried to plant its flag. The Baltimore task force, where Force's case operated, was the most aggressive, claiming complete ownership and bad-mouthing the FBI cyber squad in particular. "They think we're a joke, poking around on the internet," Tarbell told Yum. "But we're going to prove them wrong. The other agencies," he noted, had been at it for a while, and they don't have fuck all. But in the bureaucratic muddle that is the United States government, there is no clear jurisdiction for cybercrime. It's a growing field that's fueling law enforcement funding, which attracts egos and politics. Silk Road represented the new frontier of crime, a digital-era Wild West. As with the original frontier, Washington wanted to fence it in, and whoever brought law to the lawless would be a hero. Subdue the digital frontier, and there was a star waiting for you, which was why the Silk Road case had become the largest online manhunt in history. Green wouldn't stop talking, even covered in cocaine. That was how Force found him when the SWAT team finished ransacking his house. Force was running that show. As Knob, he'd orchestrated the shipment of coke, and the whole raid was part of the growing Marco Polo task force investigating Silk Road. He'd watched Green take the bait from a command post across the street, and when he walked in a few minutes later, Green was cuffed on the floor, blabbing already. Green had more answers than Force had questions. He talked and talked and talked until Force couldn't stand it. Said he was a former EMT. He was just trying to help people. They could have just knocked. He thought the package was something else, a totally legal drug called N-bomb. Shut the fuck up already, Force thought. Nevertheless, Green was a tangible lead in the Silk Road case, a corporeal asset rather than just letters on a screen. As Green was led to the squad car to be booked on possession by the local cops, Force put his number in Green's phone and said, "When you get out, call me." In jail, Green jawboned for hours to anyone who would listen, even declaring that he had been asked to cooperate with the DEA, at which point his tattooed cellmates told him to stop talking. When Green was released on bail, he went home and found his door was still broken. His daughter had cleaned up some. In his bedroom, the cops had apparently discovered that this particular Mormon grandpa owned a dildo, which they left for him standing straight up on the bed. Home alone with his 2 chihuahuas, Green cried like a baby. "I'm a good little Mormon boy," he said to himself. His thoughts grew dark. He loaded his dad's .32. Then he looked down the barrel and threw it across the room. Green would be the first to admit that he was too chicken shit for suicide. He ran into the living room and threw himself onto the couch, where his chihuahuas joined him, licking his face, while he fell to his knees to pray. Eventually, Green decided to get up, get his phone, and call DEA Special Agent Carl Force. It wasn't until Force spent some time on Green's computer and saw DPR's messages, "Why aren't you clearing out your accounts? Get back to me ASAP," that he realized they'd caught a big fish in their net. This guy was a DPR lieutenant. Force mobilized quickly, working with the task force to put Green up in a Salt Lake City Marriott and debrief him. But DPR was jittery, and he'd noticed that his trusted admin had been offline for a few days. A Google search revealed that Green had been arrested, and DPR suspected he would flip. Moreover, he got a message from another employee, Inigo, that $350,000 in bitcoins had just disappeared from various accounts. Inigo quickly traced the theft to Green's admin identity. DPR went into crisis mode, communicating with his confidants, scrambling for a solution. "This will be the first time I have had to call on my muscle. For fuck's sake," he told Inigo. Moments later, DPR messaged Knob that he had had a problem in Utah that required violence. According to the backstory Force had created for Knob, his criminal repertoire included enforcement and collection talents, so he acted the part. Sitting in the Marriott, Force received a PDF of the target, opened it, and discovered a scan of Green's driver's license photo. Then he looked across the table, where, at that very moment, Green was half asleep. Force saw an opportunity. He began texting with DPR. Knob, do you want him beat up, shot, just paid a visit? Dread, I'd like him beat up, then forced to send the bitcoins he stole back. Not sure how these things usually go. Green claimed he hadn't stolen any bitcoins and protested that the task force had had his computer when the money went missing. But Force didn't want to talk about the money. He used DPR's request to construct an elaborate plan. Dread, how quickly do you think you can get someone over there, and what's it cost? Force got Green to sign a waiver, thereby commencing his role in an impromptu, staged torture sting against DPR. Soon, Green was being dunked in the bathtub of a Marriott suite by phony thugs who were in fact a Secret Service agent and a Baltimore postal inspector. Force recorded the action on a camera. Did you get it? Green asked, wet and wheezing on the floor. He'd felt like their simulation was a little too accurate. They dunked him 4 more times to get a convincing shot. While waiting for news from Knob, DPR considered his options. A Silk Road user named Simon, a trusted advisor who had guided DPR on OPSEC, programming, and leadership, asked DPR when a transgression against Silk Road requires a lethal response. If this was the Wild West, DPR said, and it kinda is, you get hung just for stealing a horse. A few minutes later, Inigo chimed in. I don't condone murder, but that's almost worthy of assassinating him over, LOL. Later that day, DPR messaged Knob. Dread, okay, so can you change the order to execute rather than torture? Dread, he was on the inside for a while, and now that he's been arrested, I'm afraid he'll give up info. Of course, DPR was right that Green had been flipped by the very same man he'd just hired as an assassin. It was a surprising escalation. The Silk Road leader, who waxed lyrical about respecting the Silk Road community, was now pondering pricing for murder. Dread, never killed a man or had one killed before, but it is the right move in this case. How much will it cost? Ballpark, less than 100K? Have you killed or had someone killed before? It was like Scarface on Fast Forward, Force thought. But he played right along. Over a week or so, Force conspired with his team to complete the fake death of Green. Force sent DPR photos of the staged torture, followed by photos of Green face down on the floor, pallid, smeared with Campbell's chicken and stars soup, the supposed aftermath of asphyxiation. Green holed up in his house. He had to stay out of sight as part of the ruse, in a kind of self-imposed witness protection, and Force went back to Baltimore. DPR sent $40,000 to a Capital One account controlled by the government as an advance. DPR never got back the stolen bitcoins, but once in receipt of the putative proof of death, he sent another $40,000 for a job well done. Knob, you okay? Dread, I'm pissed I had to kill him, but what's done is done. DPR had momentarily wrestled with his decision. He had talked to Inigo about how he just wishes the best for people and loves them in the libertarian spirit, even Green in flagrante delicto, but ultimately concluded that his AWOL employee had become too much of a liability, and so DPR's principled technological stand against the war on drugs slid into murder. Like so many revolutionaries before him, the idealist became an ideologue, willing to kill for his beloved vision. At one point, DPR corrected Inigo that his action was not revenge, it was justice, a new justice, according to the law of the Silk Road. Back in Baltimore, sitting in his guest room with Pablo, Force thought about DPR's shift. He wondered, what changed? DPR was asking himself the same question. Moral choices blur when your identity is shifting. This was the irony behind the very idea of the Dread Pirate Roberts moniker, an inherent danger that the wearer would become the mask. Unmoored, DPR sensed that he was in a state of becoming. Knob, what have you learned? Dread, well, I'm also learning who I am. I don't think this will be the hardest thing I'll have to do. Knob, what could be harder? Dread, I don't know. Maybe I'll be faced with a decision where lives of innocent people will depend on the outcome. As if seeking a makeshift moral compass among murderers, DPR asked Knob to let him know if he was abusing his authority. That is what friends are for, Knob replied. DPR confided in Inigo that one of his deepest fears was being wildly successful and being corrupted by that power. Knob also warned his online comrade about that power, how it could consume you. In his office, Force himself had put up a picture of Jesus Malverde, the Mexican narco saint, as inspiration for Knob, and felt the pull of the folk hero bandit. He reminded DPR not to lose yourself. How could he not? Now astride a multi-million-dollar drug operation that he'd built in less than 2 years, Ross was no longer the tender-hearted soul who agonized over telling one lie to a young woman over a glass of wine. His diary had changed from a story about doubts and hopes to a catalog of hard-nosed empire building. The triumph of Silk Road confirmed its creator's belief in his own myth. What we are doing, DPR wrote to his followers, will have rippling effects for generations to come. In June 2013, the site reached nearly 1 million registered accounts, and the feds were nowhere in sight. Until one afternoon, just around that same time, back in the New York FBI cybercrime office, when Tarbell and Kiernan leaned forward and finally saw something interesting on one of their screens. They'd been at it for weeks, farting into the same chair cushions in the pit, running the Tor bundle on one monitor, staring at lists of numbers on another, when one of those numbers surprised them. 62.75.246.20. They looked at each other in disbelief, and then back at the terminal, which was displaying the true IP address of the Silk Road server. Oh man, this story, holy moly, man. This is edge of your seat sort of stuff. We've just finished part 3, and we've still got quite a ways to go, so I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. Will they ever bring Dread Pirates down? My God, I have not read ahead, so I have no idea how this goes. Ultimately, we all know what happens in the end, but part 4 is coming up next. Make sure you subscribe if you like these kinds of podcasts. If you would like to support these podcasts, you could always buy me a cup of coffee. Much appreciated. Those details are in the description. And if you have an original, compelling story that you would like me to consider reading, please send me an email. That information is also in the description. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. Stay off that dark web. And we'll see you on the next Serial Talker podcast coming up next week. Until then, ciao.